Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dribble Drive podcast. Your lovely hosts, Austin Render, Dalton Shetler with you back from Indianapolis, where we had a lot of fun at the Big Ten Tournament last week, but it is time to recap that, look ahead to March Madness Selection Sunday coming up in 5 days. It's Tuesday, March 10th, episode 93. Dalton, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
You know, we're good. We got through a really fun week of basketball there in Indianapolis. You and I didn't get to stay very long in terms of our teams both bounced on Thursday, but still plenty of great basketball to discuss. And if you want to follow along with us, go to the Back Home Network YouTube channel. It's where our episodes all air live and in recording fashion. Subscribe there, get the latest news on when we go live, and then we're also on X and Instagram at Dribble Drive WBB, and you can find all our episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts. Dalton, the Big Ten champions, no surprise, is the UCLA Bruins. I think the bigger surprise is how large of a margin of victory it was. This team is unbelievable. They just don't lose. They've yet to lose a Big Ten game outside of the city of Los Angeles since joining the conference last season. That includes 2 Big Ten tournament titles and obviously everything in the regular season. I thought, look, the championship game was lopsided, but I thought Washington and Ohio State both played UCLA fairly well. And we're right there with them in moments in the second half. The Iowa game got away quickly from the Hawkeyes, and maybe that's a 4 games in 4 days situation, or 3 games in 3 days situation. But I really, you come away from it like, if you're focusing on that championship game, which fair enough, this UCLA team is going to be very difficult to stop. And I don't know if it's overreaction to say that's the best team in the country right now.
No, see, that's exactly how I feel. And I feel like I keep getting hung up on this, and I feel like this was a microcosm of what the season was, where we talked about, for our Coach of the Year award logic. A lot of times, I think, Austin, you and I both at least tend to vote for, well, who did the most with the least? And that's usually the formula we may use. But we both voted very close, and it's because the standard was put in an impossible spot, and somehow they overexceed. And then you take a look at the Big Ten tournament. You go against Iowa. The expectation is you win. Somehow they exceed that and win by 51 points against the Hawkeyes. I mean, they have just made it a habit of overexceeding whatever the expectation is laid out in front of them. I thought, you're right, it was over pretty quickly. Iowa scored first with a 3 points. And then UCLA closed out the first quarter on a 22-2 run, and that was just the beginning of what was to come in that game. I don't come away any less confident from Iowa. I think there are 2 or 3 teams in this country that nobody can really touch, and I think UCLA fits in that class. I'm not dejected or down on Iowa. I just don't think they're in that tier. I don't think anybody really had that idea. I think it's still an impressive run for Iowa, and for them to duplicate, excuse me, getting choked up all over it. For them to duplicate what they did against Michigan yet again, this time in the semifinals, after having done it at Carver Hawkeye Arena, there's a lot of reasons to come away pretty confident and impressed with Iowa. But overall, this is really about UCLA. And look, I know a lot of times, Austin, a lot of our storylines, we talk about the teams in that second tier. We'll talk about Michigan. We'll talk about Iowa. We'll talk about Ohio State. And then we talk about the Minnesota, Michigan State, Maryland, and kind of contrast, compare everybody. UCLA has been so dominant, they haven't even allowed for interesting storylines or anything interesting because they've just seen the wins they had as they went a perfect 18-0 in the Big Ten. 15 of those were by 20 or more points. Only 2 games even got to single digits. They had just lived through everybody in this league. It was no shocker they won it all, but what a statement that was. And I think, Austin, especially given what Texas is no slouch. Texas kind of had their way with South Carolina in that SEC title game. But it feels like to me, and maybe this is prisoner of the moment based off of that, the championship's going to be UCLA and UConn. It's just how it feels as we sit here before Selection Sunday. And may the best team win. I think it's UCLA, but I think that's the kind of statement they made.
Yeah, I think we all are hoping that's a matchup we get in the national title game. Dalton, we're gonna have a live podcast moment here. Your audio's coming in a little bit like you're underwater. Do you want to switch your microphone maybe so that way I don't know, like maybe you're gargling like marshmallows or something and we just can't see it. If you want to swallow those, um,
How's this?
that
Are the
sounds much
marshmallows going?
clearer. Yep, yep. Now you're coming in crystal clear. I want people to be able to hear the lovely takes of
Thank you.
Dalton
I
Kettler.
appreciate that. Thank you.
But
Thank you.
responding to what you said, I mean, and this is that I think Sunday, and look, Coach of the Year is not decided by one game, but Sunday was an example of why I feel justified in voting Corey Close. And here's the thing: coaching is on the court, coaching is X and O's, but coaching is also putting together a roster that can win you a national championship. Like the people saying, oh, well, they've just got 6 WNBA players. Like that's part of coaching. Like part of coaching nowadays, especially, is keeping that group together. And those 6 players have now played together. I guess you look at really Kiki Rice, Lauren Betts, Gabriela Jaquez, and Angela Dukalich. They've played together for the last 3 seasons. Then you add in Shirley Sledger Walker. Last season, she doesn't play, but she's around the program. Then you add in Gianna Neepkins. And there wasn't ever a moment like Angela Dukalich is a starter in probably 17 other teams in this league. And she's good with it. She's going to be a WNBA player. She filled her role. You add Sienna Betts into the fold. Like this team was a lot of really good players that Corey Close had to figure out how to manage and put in the best spots. Gianna Neepkins, basically, and I know players do get paid at this point, but in professional ranks, let's just say she kind of took a pay cut in terms of like averaging 19 a game at Utah to now averaging about 12 to 13 a game at UCLA and playing a smaller ball in her hands less role. But she got her to buy in. Now, winning does a lot of good things for that kind of thing. But I think that's part of coaching now is the management of a team, the management of a roster. Jan Jensen has done an unbelievable job with Iowa. If you had told me they were going to be a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, a 3 seed, whatever it ends up being, I would have said no. There's no way. They'll be a tournament team, but probably a 7, 8 seed. No, they are definitively hosting, definitively a team that can make a run to the second weekend. And if they get the right draw, could maybe upset somebody and get to the Final Four. I do think this was nothing we didn't know on Sunday, is that there is a gap. And that's what's so impressive from UCLA, and the big reason I voted Corey Close Coach of the Year. They have created such a big gap from the next best teams in this league, and those teams are going to be 2 and 3 seeds in the NCAA tournament. This isn't like last season where outside of USC, it was a lot of just like good teams, but 4, 5, 6, 7 seeded teams. No, this season they're doing it against 7 potential hosting schools in the Big Ten, and they just keep blowing teams out. And I get it. Michigan played them tight in Ann Arbor. They had a shot, and the game is a 40-minute game. But UCLA kind of controlled that game for at least 37, 38 minutes of it. And so, yeah, I'm so impressed with UCLA. I cannot wait to see what they can do. But like talking about the other games, like I'm looking at the score because it snuck up on me on Friday. I was doing some stuff and I was like, oh, that UCLA Washington game's on. I looked at the score. It's 22-12 Washington. And there was never a moment. There was like interesting. But there was never a moment where I was like, UCLA's in trouble. Like, no, they're going to figure it out. And give Washington and Ohio State credit. They found ways to, at times in the 40 minutes, slow down UCLA. But ultimately, there's just too many weapons. There's too many things that they can do well. And ultimately, they are your Big Ten champions. Lauren Betts was terrific early in the tournament. And then she got great play from Kiki Rice and Gianna Neepkins down the stretch. Just a really impressive. But you mentioned that Iowa-Michigan game. Boy, Iowa has Michigan's number. I mean, that is – so I think it was, 20-6 in the fourth quarter in Iowa City. And then this one was 24-6 in the fourth quarter. Michigan actually had the lead going into the fourth quarter in an absolute rock fight of a basketball game. And Iowa just blew them out. And I think that they're shoving a little bit in our faces here, Dalton, because we kept saying, yeah, I think Michigan's the better team. I know what happened in Carver Hawkeye, but I think Michigan has the most upside. And I still think I believe that the ceiling for Michigan is higher than the ceiling of Iowa, but the floor of Iowa is way higher than I envisioned it being. Now, that was not true on Sunday, but Saturday's game, Dalton, was illuminating of, okay, this Iowa team clearly has a gear they can get to defensively that can just turn the water off of a faucet and run away from a team. So if they get the right draw, that draw is not going to be Michigan, but they get the right draw in the NCAA tournament, I think Iowa can make a run to the Final Four.
I think that's fair. And I think there's a couple of distinctions to make here, right? Because I think we can believe the ceiling of Michigan is ultimately higher than Iowa, and also believe that Iowa's a bad matchup for Michigan. And just like, I mean, for UCLA to pound Iowa by 51, UCLA is a bad matchup for Iowa. I mean, their strength is the front court. Iowa's front court is the best in the league, minus Lauren Betts. And I think you got to see the strength was stifled in that championship game. But against Michigan, Ava Hayden and Hannah Stolke, the post-to-post passing they put on together is really exemplary. I think the biggest story, though, is the fact that when you're right, I mean, Iowa is kind of putting it to us and all the naysayers a little bit when they left Iowa City after that first meeting and Michigan was held to 44 points, you kind of sat there and said, okay, well, that can't happen again. And they were held to 42 in the Big Ten tournament against Iowa. The Hawkeyes defensively have found ways to frustrate and disrupt what Michigan has going, especially there on the perimeter. Give a lot of credit to Iowa because to me, that's a lot of coaching. I think Jan Jensen, I mean, we talked about, I think, honestly, if she wasn't coach of the year, which she wasn't, according to us or the league, Corey Close was. It took something extraordinary for Corey Close and UCLA to do to take that award from her. But Jan Jensen absolutely would be. Jan Jensen, the job she's done here and to find a way to duplicate the success against what is possibly a Final Four team. We see Michigan probably being in the Elite Eight and then maybe the Final Four. That really is something outstanding that the Hawkeyes are able to do and can't go without being noticed.
No doubt about that. And I just want to throw this up because I do think on the Michigan front, they're lacking that signature win. They have a lot of good wins. They beat Michigan State twice. They went on the road and beat Ohio State. That's probably the signature win they have. But for most of the season, Dalton, our thoughts on Michigan were framed around a tight loss to UConn, a tight loss to Vandy, a tight loss to UCLA. But at some point, you've got to beat a top 10 team, and they haven't been able to do that. So just throwing the Michigan resume up, they have great wins, as we said. Minnesota's a great net win. Maryland's a great net win. Ohio State. Notre Dame's net has improved as the season's gone on, so that win looks better. But again, no UCLA, no Iowa, no Vandy, UConn in that best wins category. And again, we're holding Michigan to a high standard because that's where they've put themselves at this point, is that they must be held to a higher standard than a Minnesota, for example. And so that's why when you look at the ESPN projection there from Charlie Cream, 3 seed as compared to Iowa, who is a 2 seed, because Iowa has beaten Michigan twice. There's no getting around that. And then they have most of the same wins behind that as well in their best wins category. You can see they have 9 quad 1 wins. Michigan has 6. So Iowa has done its job against the top teams in the league, particularly Michigan, and have found their way into an opportunity there to pass Michigan on the seed line. And so it's hard. I can't say definitively that I think Michigan's the better team anymore because of what I have seen with my own eyes 2 times that Michigan and Iowa have played each other. So very curious to see what draws they get on Sunday and what their paths look like. If they can avoid the UConn bracket, Texas is good, but they've shown vulnerability at times this season. What did their coach say? Like, this is the most
Softest, I
the
think was the
soft
word he used.
the softest team he's ever coached is going to be the number 3 overall seed in the NCAA tournament. And then the 4th number 1 seed is going to probably be South Carolina, but like they've looked beatable at times this season and in tournaments the last couple of years as well. So I think that if Michigan and Iowa can avoid the UConn bracket, that would be big for them. As of right now, as a UConn bracket would be in Fort Worth, which again, don't get me started. The 2 Sweet 16 sites, both being west of the Mississippi, is just wild to me that we don't have anything in the East Coast that can host a Sweet 16. Maryland and Michigan would both be in that bracket with UConn and Vandy. So that would be a tough draw for Michigan, while Iowa right now is in the bracket with South Carolina, which I think is as friendly of a spot. Interesting note, and something to keep in mind as we get to Selection Sunday. This is just a bit of a diversion. The bracket integrity, like not putting conference teams against each other in the first 2 rounds, that can't happen every time now because of how big these conferences are. So, for example, Charlie Cream has Iowa as the 2, and in their Iowa City pod, Oregon the 7. So they try to not do that, but as Charlie Cream told us last year, they're going to have to in some circumstances. So we could see an Iowa-Oregon matchup in the 2nd round at Carver Hawkeye. So just something to keep in mind as you go through. Dalton, what team outside of UCLA and Iowa, what team bettered themselves the most in the Big Ten tournament this week?
Well, I think one team that really stood out was interesting was Oregon, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they go on a little bit of a run. They send Maryland home on the first day. I thought what Oregon did was really fascinating in this one. And I think it showed why you just can't really ever doubt Kelly Graves. Like, he just finds ways at the end of the day. His team consistently will find ways. Overall, this has been maybe underwhelming for what Oregon had thought they would be this season, just in terms of they've had a lot of opportunities they've let slip through their fingers. Honestly, you think about if they hang on to that win against possibly against Michigan and some of those other games, what Oregon season might be. But they're a fun team to watch. They showed they're great competitors in that tournament. The other one I thought was Ohio State. For Ohio State to pick up a big win against Indiana, but then defeat Minnesota. And I thought in the conversation about hosting, I think everybody feels pretty comfortable with Maryland as a host, even though they were one and done in the tournament. They did not pick up a win. Ohio State, Michigan State, Minnesota all entered that tournament really feeling bubbly on the host line. And I thought Ohio State being able to beat one of those teams directly, that being Minnesota, it feels like the Buckeyes can make their plans that the tournament will come to Columbus. I know we'll talk about that, but I think in terms of bettering themselves, Ohio State certainly has the best case to that. And I thought Oregon had a nice run in this tournament as well and showed what they're capable of.
So I totally agree. Those were 2 of the 3 teams I was going to say. Illinois is the other one. Made a nice run in Indianapolis. And why those 3 teams? Because this is what they did in their bracketology spots. Ohio State's a 3 now. Illinois is a 7. And Oregon is a 7, which 2 things. Number one, shows you the respect that Charlie Cream is expecting the committee to show the Big Ten. That a 7 or that a 8-10 Oregon team and a 9-9 Illinois team in this league are looking at 7 seeds. That shows you the respect that people are having for this Big Ten conference, and that will bleed into our bubble conversation with Nebraska later. And then 2, those seeds 3, 7, and 7 are all big because they avoid the 1 seeds for an extra round. So Ohio State being a 3 means they get a 2 in the Elite 8 or the Sweet 16 and not a 1. And for the 7 seeds, it means they go to the pot of a 2 seed instead of a 1, which I do think 1 and 2, UConn, UCLA, and even you can throw Texas in there, are the definitive 3 best teams in this country. There's a bit of a drop-off when you go down to the 2s. Not to say they aren't good, the Vandys and the Iowas of the world, Duke as well, and LSU. but they've all
Well,
had flaws. I mean, think about how badly Duke started this season.
to your point, look at the Big Ten tournament game. UCLA is a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Iowa might be a 2 seed, and the difference was 51 points. Like, it's not that those teams aren't good, but there is a very definitive gap between them and those twos.
Yeah. So Illinois going and winning 2 games in the Big Ten tournament, getting the quad 1 win over Michigan State. Oregon going and winning 2 games, getting a quad 1 win over Maryland. That's the kind of stuff that's going to help you jump a seed and get off that. You just Illinois was in that 8-9 last year. They don't want to be in that again. They want to get a chance to maybe upset somebody, and I think that team can do it. And so I think those were the best weeks of anybody in the Big Ten tournament. Who hurt themselves? Go ahead. You want to add one more there?
I just was going to say, as you talked about Illinois, I think it's worth noting that they are shooting the ball at a ridiculous clip right now. Like, they are hot. They're feeling it. They against Iowa to finish that game when they had a chance at Carver Hawkeye Arena, they had made 8 straight threes. They made the first 2 threes of the next game. So as a unit, they made 10 straight threes. And then, of course, in that Big Ten tournament game, honestly, you can say that was one of the differences. I'm sure we'll talk some, because there were 2, I think, really interesting games from the Big Ten tournament in terms of competitiveness, one being Indiana, Nebraska, the other being Michigan State, Illinois. But Michigan State dominated the game against Illinois in terms of they out-rebounded the Illini by 11. They won the turnover battle, but they didn't hit shots. And Illinois shot above 50%. They made almost half of their threes. Michigan State only hit 3 threes and went 17 of 32 on layups. And give credit to Illinois. I mean, it turned into a make-or-miss game because the Spartans won the possession battle, and Illinois is shooting the ball that well that you just can't count on them out, even if they're getting beaten all the other facets. And I think that's a big point to the Illini heading into the NCAA tournament.
I think it took a little bit for Illinois to figure out how to play without Gretchen Dolan, who was a big part of their plans early. They seem to have figured that out. And getting Aaliyah Guyton into the mix, she's playing like the player we were kind of like, oh, this is a great pickup for Illinois. And it took her a little bit, but she's gotten there. And Maddie Weber off the bench is a huge weapon for Illinois. So I'm totally with you. They're in a good spot. What team made things worse for themselves in the Big Ten tournament? Who's leaving Indianapolis with the biggest kind of gripe on what they were able to accomplish or lack thereof?
I have 3 that will come to mind here. One being Nebraska, losing to Indiana in the opening game, because I mean, Nebraska still very well may make the NCAA tournament, but they had a chance to not leave the fate up in the air so much and sweat as much on Selection Sunday. They still, I mean, by ESPN bracketology, they're in, but it is close. They could have maybe reassured some things. They necessarily won't have that. And obviously, I see you have the resume here, the visual graphic up here, as we talk about Nebraska in the bubble. But for them to allow Indiana to come back in that game, that collapse, I think the Cornhuskers really are kind of shaking their head leaving Indy.
Yeah, and they could have played. I think they are going to make it. They could have played themselves out of the first 4 by winning a game or 2 in Indianapolis. Now, for sure, if they make it, they're going to have an extra play-in game that they're going to have to tangle with. That was tough. And I thought Indiana did a lot of good things in that second half. Obviously, the Hoosiers made a lot of shots. I thought they started doubling the post a little bit more, which gave Nebraska some issues. I also thought Nebraska just kind of abandoned the game plan that was working for them for the first 20 minutes. That high pick and roll had Indiana in fits. I mean, it was just Maya Hargrove or Petra Bojan or Jessica Petrie would come up and set the screen for Prince, and then Prince rolled off of it and then would decide from there what she wanted to do, and pretty much had the opportunity to read a book and figure out what the best page was in that book before she had to make a decision. Everything was just right there for her. And what Indiana did in the second half, they started fighting through that screen a little bit more, and then they were doubling the post. And that forced some Nebraska turnovers, and then a little bit of Nebraska just settling for some threes in situations where it's like, you don't need to shoot that right there. So it was a weird second half. Give Indiana a lot of credit for fighting back from 20 down. Terry Morin said it. Look, you don't fight from 20 down without starting 0-10 in the league. Like she said, this team is weathered. This team has been through a lot. And they found their lowest of lows and got up from it. So they weren't worried about coming back in that game because they felt like they could. So I do think Nebraska hurt themselves. Kind of a co-second for me would be Minnesota, Michigan State. Two
Yeah,
teams
those are
that
my
I
other
think,
two.
yeah, they could have locked up a hosting spot by probably winning their first games. And instead, now it hangs in the balance. And according to Charlie Cream, Michigan State would be the one that's hurt the most by that because they are the 5 seed now. According to Charlie Cream, Minnesota is still a 4. So those would be the other two for me.
Before you continue on, because I completely agree with you, and I know we're going to have a whole conversation around that, Charlie Cream also doesn't have Kentucky hosting at this point in time, which the NCAA committee might feel different about because Kentucky picked up a couple of wins in the SEC tournament before dropping to South Carolina. They looked impressive. Overall, their conference record's an even 500. They went 8-8, but they've gained a lot of steam and momentum. So Charlie Cream has Minnesota hosting, but not Kentucky. And my point to this is we have no idea what the committee thinks different than Cream. But you've got a lot of different teams with West Virginia also winning the Big 12 tournament. It looks like they're going to take a hosting spot based on their work in their conference tournament. So this pool gets a little bit more diluted before we jump fully into it.
So let's do that. This is a free flowing show here. I don't have any agenda here. So I was just going to kind of let this conversation. We've got graphics that can assist with it if you're watching us on YouTube. Let's do the Michigan State Minnesota situation here. I don't know if this is an apples to apples, like these are the last two. I don't know that. Like you said, Kentucky, even Ole Miss had a great SEC tournament. So maybe those two teams are closer than Michigan State. I don't know. Maybe Minnesota's not the last 4 seed. Maybe it's West Virginia. I don't know. But let's just for this podcast's sake say it's Minnesota, it's Michigan State. There's the numbers on your screen if you're watching us. Both teams with identical 22-8 records. Minnesota had 2 more wins against Big Ten opponents than Michigan State did. The quad 1 records are the same, but Michigan State a perfect 5-0 in quad 2 to add a little bit more meat to the bone. Minnesota, the metrics have loved them all season. They are 9th in the net, 18th in the WAB. I don't know if that's a shorthand that people use for that, the WAB. The WAB doesn't roll off the tongue the same way the net does.
WAB.
Michigan State 17th and 16th, so pretty consistent in the metrics. And again, that's a typo on the bottom for Minnesota. They have won 10 of their last 12 games, I believe is what it was, as opposed to 10 of final 10. That's obviously they're not on a 10-game winning streak. But the point is they are trending in positively, while Michigan State may be falling in, losing 6 of their last 9. The important thing that's not on this graphic, though, Dalton, is that Michigan State owns the head-to-head in the barn. That's one of their best wins of the season. Maybe, I think it is their best win of the season as we flash Michigan State's resume. Yeah, that's their best net win of the year is at Minnesota. Minnesota doesn't have the bad loss that Michigan State does to Wisconsin, but Michigan State has a few more toward the top of the net rankings that maybe Minnesota doesn't. So you've got the Michigan State side of this. Obviously, I expect you to go to bat for the Spartans, kind of paint the picture, and then I don't mean to be devil's advocate, but I will just look from the other side of the aisle as well.
No, and I think obviously that's great for the show. And also, I think it's kind of fair. I feel like all this is pretty nuanced. And I think what makes it nuanced, I would have a hard time saying that Minnesota's resume overall is better than Michigan State's, honestly. Like if you hit me with truth serum with the even record, I do think some of Michigan State's wins really stand out there, especially the head-to-head at Minnesota by 14 on their senior night. I think overall the conversation really becomes, and I don't know how much the committee actually talks about this, but for Michigan State, as you mentioned, they're going into the NCAA tournament on a bit of a downswing. And you knew with February's schedule that Michigan State was going to have some losses coming, right? You had Michigan twice in there. You had UCLA. You had a desperate Maryland team. You had Ohio State. You had the at Minnesota game. It was a gauntlet in February and into March. But overall, I think the thing that's most concerning for Michigan State is the Spartans just haven't looked the same consistently that they did early in the season that got them out to a school best 17-1 start in history. I think overall, You saw Michigan State really battle with Michigan, and that was the first game of February in East Lansing, an overtime game that might still go down as the best game of the Big Ten this year, maybe updone by Ohio State, Michigan, that was done just a couple of weeks ago. Michigan keeps having a part in some of these classic games. Against UCLA, look, we talked about everybody got beat by 20 or more against the Bruins. I don't think you shake too much there. The Maryland game was disappointing. The Terps came out with a fire that was just simply bigger than Michigan State's. You felt like they wanted that one a little bit more. You certainly didn't feel like the effort was there for the first half against Ohio State. Some of these other ones, Illinois in the Big Ten tournament, it was a game that you controlled, but you just didn't seize on the extra possessions that you created. I mean, if you look up and down the box score, you'd have a hard time believing Illinois wins that game until you land on field goal percentage and 3-point percentage. So effort-wise, I don't think was a huge concern for Michigan State in that game. They played hard. They just couldn't capitalize on the opportunities they made. That's the part that's so concerning to me because, look, and I know we have some Michigan State fans that follow the program. If Michigan State doesn't end up as the foreign host, it's not a death sentence. This team, if they kind of hit the smelling salts this week and wake back up to old form, Michigan State can go on the road and beat somebody at their place. They showed that with the win at Minnesota. It is not a death sentence. It's not everything. It would be really cool for the fans to be able to experience it in East Lansing. And I know that's a big reason why they're also pushing so much for it. And again, to the point, like if we stack the resumes of Michigan State, Minnesota, I do have a difficult time believing that Minnesota's resume is better than Michigan State. You can tell why in a moment, Austin, that it is. But I would say Minnesota is playing consistently better basketball at the moment than Michigan State. That's my nuanced take on it.
I think that's a very fair look at it. We've had the Michigan State resume up here. Here's the Minnesota resume. They do have a win over Ohio State, which is very good. That win at Iowa is a massive win for Minnesota. I do think that, yeah, you can look at the numbers, and I think this is part of this conversation. Then we've got a bubble conversation as well, and I think it applies to both. The eye test is not a number, and the eye test is not a category that is supposed to weigh in heavily into a seeding situation. But we're all human. The people in the room are human, and there is something to the way I have watched Michigan State play over the last 5 weeks has not been that aesthetically pleasing. Like it's not necessarily that they're losing pretty sizably. I mean, they think about the second Michigan game. You think about the Maryland game, the Ohio State game, like just games that aren't really fourth quarter competitive. And so, meanwhile, you've got Minnesota, who in the last 5 weeks has picked up wins at Iowa, against Ohio State, against Nebraska. Like, there's been good stuff on the bone for Minnesota here down the stretch of the season. Now, did Michigan State get a better non-con win? Yes. Do they have more quad 2 wins? Yes. But I don't know. I think that I am definitely guilty of the recency bias and of the eye test when I think about these things. And to me, when I watch these teams play, Minnesota is playing better basketball right now than Michigan State is.
I would agree.
But I think if you are a numbers person and statistically you're looking at 10 quad 1 and 2 wins for Michigan State compared to 7 for Minnesota, the head-to-head for Michigan State, which has to mean something, like I totally get it from both sides of the aisle here. I think this is a really difficult one. But we've got people in the chat. Carol says, no team with Michigan State's metrics has ever been left out of the top 16. Denver Kroger says, honestly, feels like Minnesota would get the nod right now, but that's just me. I think this is a pretty split decision. Like, I think you can literally tilt this thing either direction, and people are going to accept it, but people are going to be mad no matter which way you go with this thing. So it'll be interesting to see. One team's going to get to host, one's going to have to go travel. But like you said, Dalton, both of these teams, whichever one, if one of them gets a 5, they can absolutely go and win on the road. We've seen it from Michigan State just 2-3 weeks ago when they won at the Barn, back in December when they won against Ole Miss at a neutral site. And then when they went out west and swept Oregon and Washington, like Michigan State has gone on the road and done this. So can they do it? Absolutely. I think if you ask me for a gut check right now, I think Minnesota will get it. Minnesota is going to be the Final Four. Michigan State will be a 5. Right now, Charlie Cream has them going to Norman to take on or to be in the Oklahoma pod, which would be a lot of fun. That's just my gut reaction. I think is that Michigan State will be passed by Minnesota.
Well, and what I think is interesting too, like as Carol brought up, the metrics are very strong and the resume is really strong. It just, I would be interested how much the committee actually plays into what we talked about. The level of basketball Minnesota's playing right now is higher consistently than what Michigan State has in the last few weeks. Doesn't mean they're necessarily overall a better basketball team, but Michigan State hasn't proven it consistently the last few weeks, which certainly pains me to say. They had the great moment at the barn, but overall, the thing I'd point out too, Austin, because look, we could have a lot of conversation comparing Michigan State and Minnesota. There's still a possibility, I believe, that maybe neither of these teams get to host. And that's something that might be interesting to discuss as well. I think you and I both feel confident that Maryland would be a 4 seed right now, right?
Yeah, let me throw their resume up here. No bad losses for Maryland. There was that stretch there in the middle of the season where they fell to 3-6 in the Big Ten, but they won 8 of their last 9, which included wins at Ohio State, at Michigan State. They went out to USC. Earlier in the season, they had that crazy hang on and or come back and win game at Minnesota, which has certainly aged very well. The metrics really like Maryland. 8 wins in quads 1 and 2, including 6 in quad 1. I think that they're playing good basketball. And look, again, in the human category, we're all human. Brenda Freese in Maryland carries a name with it, carries some weight to it. And I think when a team like Maryland is on the bubble for something, that name brand recognition does mean something. And so I think Maryland will be comfortably in as a hosting school.
And there is a variable to this too, right? That operationally on campus, you have to be able to perform everything that's needed by the NCAA. And Maryland's proven over the years they're able to do that. It's not much of a question. They get how to do this. Like that is kind of an unspoken variable to this entire process can the actual institutions handle this? Can they operate it? Can they perform? So on and so forth. But so if we feel confident about Maryland being a 4 seed, I think we feel confident about Oklahoma being a 4 seed. If anything, it'd be the other way that they'd be a 3. But I think based on the latest momentum, you feel good about Maryland and Oklahoma being 4s. That being said, that opens the conversation up for the last 2 spots between, as we talked about, Minnesota, Michigan State, who both are deserving and right there in that conversation, mixed in with West Virginia, who just ran through the Big 12 tournament and knocked off a really good TCU team in the process. Looks like they might jump up to a 4. And then the other one's Kentucky. We talked about them a little bit earlier ago, but a little while ago, but they picked up 2 wins in that SEC tournament. Didn't feel like they were too far off the mark heading into the conference tournament season. And of course, the SEC is really just as good as the Big Ten in some ways. And in some ways, it's even better at the very top. But I think ultimately, you're talking about 4 teams for those 2 final hosting spots. 2 of them are in the Big Ten, 2 of them not in the Big Ten. That part will be interesting too, because I think the committee could go any which way on some of those in the final 2 spots.
I think West Virginia is in. I think you're a Big 12 champ. I think that's going to hold the most weight of anything when comparing those 4 teams.
And I agree. And if we're willing to take that step, then we're talking 1 spot for 3 teams.
Yep. And right now, Charlie Cream has Minnesota in that spot. Here's what I will say to Carol about the numbers. They do help with the precedents and like what has happened, but every year is different. Like, I mean, just look at the Big Ten, for example. The Big Ten last season's 8-10 Minnesota, who had a great net. I believe it was in the 30s last season, did not make the NCAA tournament, and we weren't all that shocked by it. Whereas this season, we're looking at a 7-11 Nebraska team making the tournament and an 8-10 Oregon team being a 7 seed. So things change. Obviously, win-loss records change, metrics change. Each tournament is a little bit different. It's not like a court case where a precedent was set, so we must follow it. Everything's fluid. So things can happen. Things can change. Carol's asking if we can talk about the last reveal, the last top 16 reveal. That at that point had Maryland 13. Oklahoma was 12, by the way. So Oklahoma, I think, is going to be in, like you said. They're either going to jump to a 3 or be a 4. And you've got Maryland at 13. All they've done since that reveal is just kind of control themselves. Even if you want to ding them for the Oregon loss, they're not falling down 4 spots. Michigan State,
and I want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off. I do want to jump into the reveal was released on Sunday morning before the end of the regular season. So Maryland had already lost to Michigan on that Saturday.
Yes.
So that already took into effect the loss they had to finish the regular season. So all they did was have the loss in the Big Ten tournament, where some of the other teams we're going to talk about had 2 results in hand since the reveal, one being Michigan State at 14, who lost then to Ohio State and then lost to Illinois in the Big Ten tournament.
It's weird because it says on here that it's through games of March 1st, but you're right. It came out March 1st morning or like early afternoon.
11:30 in the morning, because we tipped off in East Lansing against Ohio State at noon, and we had the process in hand, or the announcement in hand heading into the ball game.
Yeah. So you had Maryland at 13, and again, they've lost to Oregon since, but I don't think they're going to fall any further than 1 or 2 spots. They're going to be a 4 team. Michigan State 14, Minnesota 15, Ohio State 16. Since this reveal, Michigan State has gone 0-2 with a loss to the team 2 spots below them, and then a loss to Illinois. Minnesota, since this reveal, has beaten Illinois, but then lost to the team below them in Ohio State. So I think there's no doubt Ohio State, since that reveal, has beaten the 2 teams in front of them. They're going to jump both of those teams. So now you're looking at Maryland 13, Ohio State 14. You've also had Kentucky, like you said, Dalton, bang down the door in the SEC tournament a little bit more than these other 2 teams did. You look at what Kentucky did. They went to the SEC tournament and beat Arkansas, Georgia, and then lost to South Carolina. So the Georgia win is a 15-point win over a ranked team. That's a solid win there for Kentucky. And then you look at Ole Miss, who I think is a little bit further down this list, but they picked up a win over Vanderbilt, which is a really nice top 5 victory. I don't think they've done enough to do it. So I think you're right. Then you're looking at, and then West Virginia, who was not in this, but West Virginia went and won the Big 12. Like, to me, that's a no-brainer. They've done enough to pop their head into that conversation. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to be Minnesota and Ohio, or I think it's going to be Minnesota, Michigan State for that last spot. I really do.
Yep.
And I know Carol keeps bringing up the WAB, and I do think the WAB is a part of the equation, but it's not the end-all, be-all. That you have to mix all these things together. There's so many things that we don't know that the committee might be weighing. It'll be interesting. It'll be very interesting to see what this looks like. I do think it's going to be Minnesota or Michigan State. My gut says Minnesota.
Hey, college football playoff, it was Miami Notre Dame, and they said head-to-head mattered. So
they did.
If you're a Spartan fan, hope head-to-head is the end-all, be-all in the NCAA women's basketball tournament selection here.
Look, I could sit here and hear that argument and be like, yep, totally get it. Totally get it. I don't think either team will be happy with the result, but I don't think either way is necessarily a wrong decision by the committee. I think they both are deserving, but both have their moments and their things on the data points that say maybe not. So, like, I think you can go either way with it. And you know what? This is the type of thing where, like, when the college football playoff was 4 teams and the 5th team got left out, you're thinking, man, there wasn't much undefeated Florida State could have done other than their quarterback not get hurt. But then when it goes to 12, it's like, okay, well, team 13 finished 9-3. Like, there were things they could have done. That's what I look at in this situation, is like, whoever doesn't get it, you weren't robbed. There were just moments down the stretch. Like Minnesota, go and beat Ohio State on Friday, and you're in. There's no doubt about it. Michigan State, like, either honestly win a game or just be a little bit
And
more
closer.
competitive.
Yeah.
Like that's what's
Yep.
killed me down the stretch is how Michigan State's been beaten badly and on their home floor by both
Fair.
Maryland and Ohio State coming down the stretch. So a lot of things to consider there. There's another debate to be had as well, Dalton, and that's with the bubble. So not a debate. I shouldn't say that. Let's put Nebraska's resume up.
Conversation.
This is Nebraska's resume. Again, for those who are listening in podcast form, 18-12, 7-11 in the Big Ten, lost in the first round to Indiana in the Big Ten tournament after a 12th place finish. Their best wins are at Washington, Illinois, and a neutral site with Virginia. They have some worse losses. Again, that's carrying some weight. Losing to Indiana on a neutral site is not a bad loss. It's just one of the worst ones they have. And then the loss at Wisconsin is hurting them with a net of 86. Nebraska, again, just 1-10 in quad one games this season. That one win came in the second to last week of the season. They have been good in quad four. They do have that one quad three loss to Wisconsin, but Charlie Cream has them as the second to last team in his field right now. The discussion that I want to have, and I'm not necessarily pitting these two teams against each other, but let me just run an exercise here and show you a couple of the numbers between Nebraska and Indiana, who, again, keep in mind, 6 days ago, Indiana won head-to-head on a neutral site. They have the same amount of total wins. They have the same amount of wins against the Big Ten. Each team has 7 if you include Indiana's Big Ten tournament win. Indiana actually has more quad 1 wins than Nebraska, but Nebraska has more quad 2. The metrics like Nebraska a lot more than Indiana, or at least the net does, because of the way Nebraska blew out teams in the non-con compared to Indiana trying to figure it out there in non-conference play. The WAB is a little bit closer, 39th to 47th, while the net is 28th to 54th. Nebraska comes in losing 7 of its last 9, while Indiana has won 7 of its last 10. So again, another conversation of, like, what have you done for me lately? Kind of like the Minnesota-Michigan State situation. This one's not as close. It's not one-on-one like the other one is. Nebraska, I think, is going to get in. The only reason I brought this up is because in the latest bracketology for Charlie Cream, he actually put Indiana in his next 4 out. Now, they would still have 8 teams to climb. Indiana, I'm not sitting here saying they're going to make the tournament. But I'm just trying to present the question of how is Nebraska so far ahead of Indiana? But I'm struggling with that. And if you say it's the net, okay, so we're saying what Nebraska did in November is the reason that they are 30 spots higher than Indiana, which I get it. It's a full season of data points, totally get it. But to me, you can put Nebraska in there. I just don't know how they're like 12 spots in the pecking order higher than Indiana, who just beat them 6 days ago and has an extra quad 1 win that Nebraska does not have.
Well, and I'd be curious your thoughts on it. I think overall we could have a conversation about the net metric struggling. I know it is just a sorting tool. So like Minnesota being 9th in the net, they're not just automatically granted the first 3 seed. Like that's not how the committee is using these. That they're just using it to at first bring to the table and then move around as it makes sense. So it is just a sorting tool, but overall, it feels like the net has really rewarded those non-conference wins when you play East, West, South, North, Central.
Yep.
And you win by a hefty enough margin.
Yep.
I don't think Nebraska's the only team you're seeing that with. I think you're seeing it a lot.
Yep. I think Arizona State's in that conversation as well. Some of these other schools in the bubble. Yeah.
I think overall, the best way to go about it is because, like, as you stack those 2 records together and those resumes together and how similar they are and the difference in the net between the 2 are by 20 or 30, just about 30.
36 or 26 spots, yeah.
like I'm with you. I don't necessarily believe Indiana is a NCAA tournament team this year. I know you're not arguing that. I know that's not the consensus thought. But for the gap to be that wide between Nebraska and Indiana with the same conference record, with the same amount of wins for the season, Indiana having more quad one wins than what Nebraska has, for it to be a 30 or 26 to be specific, if we want to be really accurate with it, a 26 different differential in margin between Nebraska and Indiana, I think it says more about the net metric as a whole than it does anything else. And I think maybe we need to find, and I don't have solutions. It's easy for me to point at problems, especially without bringing a solution to the table. But the net metric really seems to be struggling, at least on the women's side. I don't know if it's having better success as a formula or as a tool on the men's side in college basketball, but on the women's side, this seems pretty wonky.
Yeah. So, and it'd be different. For example, USC 17-13 overall record. I'm not bringing them into this discussion because those 17 wins and those 13 losses are against a much harder schedule.
Yeah.
Nebraska and Indiana actually play decently similar non-conference schedules against not great teams. Indiana's loss in the non-con was to Iowa State. They beat a Gonzaga team that's fine. Nebraska beat a Virginia team that ended up being a bubble team and has given them a little bit of a boost. But it's 18-18 with strength of schedules that I don't think are that much different, as opposed to like USC scheduled for having Juju Watkins. They obviously did not have Juju Watkins, so they get some grace with that schedule. But I just don't think when I'm picking between two teams, and again, this is not a Nebraska-Indiana 1-for-2 or 2-for-1 situation. But if I were picking for my bubble teams on March, what's it going to be on Sunday? March 15th? Yeah, March 15th. Yeah. I don't think you smoking teams in the second week of November should have as much weight as it appears it has in this head-to-head conversation. Like, that's the only thing I can wrap my head around, is that Indiana struggled in some games early against Eastern Michigan and Illinois, Chicago, and got blown out early in Big Ten play because they didn't have Z and they were still figuring themselves out. So lopsided losses to Minnesota and Illinois. And they've kind of figured themselves out here over the last month and a half. Again, I want to reiterate, not sitting here arguing that Indiana necessarily is a tournament team. I'm just trying to bring to the table, okay, if we're going to say Nebraska is, then where's the disconnect between Indiana and Nebraska? And if you're going to tell me it's net, then I don't love that, because I just don't know, like you said, if that's the best sorting tool. I was presenting it as at the Big Ten tournament. If Indiana could have beaten Ohio State, I think they could have had a case to be in the tournament. Now, they did not. They were exhausted. They ended up falling short. But I don't know. And Carol's saying that's why the committee uses WAB more than the net. Well, if you're using the WAB, Indiana and Nebraska are pretty darn close in that category. So again, where's the disconnect? Like, there's only 8 spots between them and the WAB. How are they 12 spots apart on the ladder rung? Unfortunately, our friend Charlie Cream was hacked on Twitter, so I can't ask him these questions. But again, I think the metrics really like Nebraska because in the non-conference play, they smoked everybody in front of them. And
that gets rewarded.
That's part of what you got to do in today's college basketball is you got to go and you got to blow teams out. They beat Northwestern State by 60, Samford by 34, Creighton by 34, Oral Roberts by 50, Purdue Fort Wayne by 23. Like, they just went and blew people out, whereas Indiana struggled, and they had some games they had to come from behind. They beat UIC by 16. They beat Marshall by 6. They beat Florida State by 4. They beat Gonzaga by 4. They beat Eastern Michigan by 17. Like, there wasn't as convincing. But I don't know. I think, like, my point is, okay, Nebraska, you can be a tournament team, but why is Indiana not right on your heels with the way the Hoosiers finished the season? I do think there's a little bit, again, in the bucket, Dalton, of we're all human. There's a little bit of Indiana was 0-10. And that was end of story. They're not a tournament team. And I don't think that Indiana was thought of much post mid-June or mid-January.
Mhm.
So that's the human element of it. And I give Indiana's players and their staff a lot of credit for getting themselves to a situation where you could at least have this discussion.
For
This
sure.
team was 0-10 in the Big Ten and 11-11 on the season. And for them to not give in and to be in a position where their name is at least on the bubble, I think goes a long way for this team. And with a number 6 recruiting class next season, I think Indiana will be right back in this conversation for tournament spots. And won't be long, I think, before they're back in the hosting conversation as well. But just one of those years where it got away from Indiana. Anything else that we missed from the Big Ten tournament, Dalton, that you wanted to bring up, or anything from NCAA tournament look aheads? Obviously, we're going to have a bracket in our hands next week when we're talking about all this stuff. We're probably going to have to talk about a Nebraska game early in the week, looking at a potential first 4 game. We had Washington in that last season. Anything you're looking at as we look back at the Big Ten tournament, look ahead at the NCAA tournament?
No, I know we're getting ready to get out of here in the next couple of minutes. I do just want to give you the floor to talk about the awards from the Big Ten tournament.
So I don't mean this as a slight on anybody that got selected.
I do like our weekly render rants if we start.
I'm getting a little. I might need to tone back. I don't mean this out of anger. This is more so of like, okay, we have got to stop in Big Ten tournament tournament, all tournament teams. We've got to stop either. I don't know how to phrase this. I think we're putting too much emphasis on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it's okay to throw somebody a bone if they played great on Thursday and Friday and their team just didn't make it. So, for example, Kennedy Blair, most points anybody scored in the tournament, a 30-piece, nearly carried her team to that win. I know they lost, but that's a performance to me that deserves to be on the all-tournament team. I get it. They didn't win a game. But to me, that's what the all-tournament team is for, is to honor the people who had great tournaments. Like, the disconnect for me there is hard to figure out. Like, somebody like a Jasmine Brown-Hager had a couple of great games in this tournament, played really well against Michigan State, and then had 22 points against Iowa. Like, that's the kind of stuff that would love to see that get mentioned a little bit more. Aluccio Kanawa, 27 points in the loss to Oregon. Another really good performance. An Oregon team that made a big run behind some really big performances from Katie Fiso, who scored 20 against Purdue and then 22 against Michigan. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I don't like. I get it. Like, it's going to happen. You're going to get the teams that make it to the tournament to the championship are the ones that are going to get those spots. I get it. But it's also hard, Dalton, because they end up having they end up having us submit them, I think, by halftime. And full disclosure, I did not vote this year because I was doing a lot of Indiana baseball that weekend, and so I was not watching. So I didn't want to just blindly vote. I think there's a lot of blind votes that go into this thing.
Sure.
I take my vote very seriously. And so if I didn't watch the games, I'm not just going to go box score and put somebody in, which I guess is kind of what I'm doing in this rant. But those
games, you saw the performance from Kennedy Blair, which, by the way, did you think I was going to fall out of my chair during that broadcast? You were 2 seats over from me.
I was like a de facto member of the Spartan broadcast crew for that game. I almost fell out of my chair when she hit the 3. I think that was like her 27th, 26 point or whatever. She was wowing me with that performance. It felt like, and there was an Illinois fan right behind me who on every single possession kept saying, stop the ball. And then Kennedy would just like quickly dribble down and lay it in. They're like, stop the ball. It was wonderful. Kiki Rice was the most outstanding player. She had a terrific tournament. Lauren Betts, absolutely. Ava Hayden, yes. Chance Gray was really good in this tournament, was great against Indiana, had a really good game against UCLA. Hannah Stuelke, okay, she had a couple of 13-point games, had a double-double against Michigan, but didn't score. 0 points in the championship game. That's hard for me to get on board with a all-tournament performer if you scored 0 in the most important game of said tournament. And again, that's part of, like, I think you have to have them in by halftime. Like, that's hard. But Kennedy Blair with 30, Jasmine Brown-Hager, Katie Fiso, Alucci Okanawa. Like, there were some performances in this tournament. I get it. There's only 5 spots. But
Blair's one game had more points than Stolke's 3 in the tournament.
Yeah.
Added up
Same
that
with
way.
Okanawa. Like, both of them played one game and scored more than Hannah Stuelke scored the entire week. And look, I'm not trying to make this all about Hannah Stuelke, but I just think that we can use this spot as an opportunity to recognize performances in the tournament that were impressive. And not everything has to lead to a win. Like Kennedy, all you had to do was turn on the film of that Illinois-Michigan State game and realize how special that performance was from Kennedy Blair, because I kept watching that game and looking at the score going, Illinois must be up by like 7, 8, 9 points because they're just shooting it so well. But every time you looked up, it's a 3 or 4 point game because every time Michigan State comes down the floor, Kennedy Blair does something and gets Michigan State back into it. So just wanted to shout out, not necessarily a rant, but I have an hour-long podcast where I can say, here are the people that deserved a little bit more shine, you know? And that's what we're doing. So for Katie Fiso, for Kennedy Blair, for Alucci Okanawa, for Jasmine Brown-Hager, there you go. You had a great Big Ten tournament, and looking forward to seeing what all of you do in the NCAA tournament.
And I was going to say, because that's really what we're about, is spreading recognition around as much as possible on the podcast. I mean, that was the origin point of this whole thing. It's not to punch down on like Hannah Stuelke, because honestly, I voted for Hannah Stuelke to be on the All Big Ten team. That was a vote I made. I think she's a very talented player. I just don't think the tournament was her greatest work, but I don't think she would argue that. Averaging 8.5 points per game in the tournament, I don't think it doesn't match the season average of Hannah. She's a really good player, and she's all Big Ten worthy. She is all Big Ten. But I see what you're saying with tournament team. That does feel odd.
It's a spot for us to recognize the tournament. And so looking forward to that. Hey, by the way, we should mention this, that we have a new head coach at Rutgers. Rutgers women's basketball has hired one of the lead assistants from LSU, Gary Redis. Redis.
I don't know how to pronounce.
We're gonna figure that out. Welcome to the Big Ten, Gary. We're gonna figure it out. I promise. He comes over from LSU. Obviously, a lot of big time moments there with Kim Mulkey and the Tigers. So he will take on the Rutgers job. And also, since we've last talked, the Penn State job has opened up. Carolyn Keeger is out in Happy Valley. So they and Northwestern are still looking for new head coaches. I do believe that would be the only jobs that we would have thought might open up. I think from there on, I think we're good. Like, maybe Purdue was the only other one that could have maybe opened, but if we haven't heard it by now, I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, and I don't know how credible the reporters were, but I did read something on social media, reports on social media, that momentum was to keep Katie Geralds there at Purdue. Again, I don't know the reporters who put that out there. I can't even remember their names. So take that with a grain of salt, because I just don't know the credibility to lend it. But that was a topic on social media the last couple of days.
Yep, and I think you're right. I think she will stay, and they're going to need a big year next season for Purdue. But Penn State, Northwestern, still looking for new people. We will talk more about these things, more about Gary and the hire there at Rutgers as we get through the postseason. But certainly next week's show and the next several shows are going to be NCAA tournament driven. When we get into April and May, we'll dive into some post-mortem, some looks at the seasons that were, teams that overachieved, teams that underachieved, new coaches, all that stuff. That'll be more off-season stuff, but just did want to mention that there is a new head coach for the Scarlet Knights. We're going to have a bracket by the next time we talk, Dalton. This is going to be wonderful. We had the mini bracket in Indianapolis next week. We're going to have the big one with 68 teams on it. Looking forward to what our Big Ten teams could have. We had UCLA in the Final Four last season. I'm going to say they're going to be there again, Dalton, and I think we'll probably talk about it more next week. But thanks to everybody who watched us live. We had another great live audience, a very active chat today, which is always fun. We love when the chat is active. If you're listening to us and you want to be a part of that chat, go check out the Back Home Network YouTube channel for all of our live episodes. With Dalton Shetler, a fun one this week. We've got the NCAA Tournament to talk about next week. Until then, we'll talk to you guys next time.